I think what makes men cry is the same thing that makes women cry. It feels good to sort of let yourself feel bad.
I try to hide it like I think most dudes do, but not because I'm sad, it's just because I don't want people to feel like they need to help.
Hello everyone, my name is Christian. You not know this month is Men's Mental Health Awareness. My message today will be discussing how media portrays men's vulnerability and how hard it is for men to express their true feelings. It is important to support the men in your life because men die by suicide at 3.5 times the rate of women. About 60% of men are likely to experience trauma in their lifetime. 1 out of 10 men experience major depression, and 50% of men are too afraid to seek help. Men's mental health matters. Many suffer in silence because of the expectations we continue to perpetuate. Let's end this stigma together. Also, October 31st, 2021, I lost my childhood friend, Leonard Maxwell. This one's for you. You've probably heard the old adage, boys don't cry. That sentiment has been floating around our culture for a very long time. It is a curious phrase though, isn't it? When we hear someone say boys don't cry, we know it isn't meant literally. That is when we know boys, by extension, men, do in fact cry. We see it all the time, both in real life and at the movies. Even tough character cries occasionally. So what does that phrase really mean? Boys don't cry. It's really a culture ideal for manhood. What most people mean is boys are not supposed to cry. But even that phrase isn't entirely accurate because there is a few situations where crying is permitted. So basically the most accurate statement would be, boys are not supposed to cry except under a set of circumstances. Yeah, okay. In my video, these set of circumstances, which are in fact very narrow, we're going to focus on because of these moments of vulnerability, however brief, can tell us a lot about the construction of masculinity.
I cry.
I feel that.
Yeah, no, I'm not
From
scared
you.
of emotions.
Yeah,
You know, I
that's
understand.
nice.
Yeah. I'm scared of weakness. I don't like weakness, but I don't think crying is weakness. I think
No.
it's weak to not want to cry. I think
Yes.
it's weak to not want to embrace the full spectrum of life. You know, and life is filled with beautiful things and
Now, I'm primarily concerned with the examining overarching media patterns and looking at these patterns help shape social norms in our large culture. Of course, all men are not painted with the same cinematic brush. Since they have not yet entered manhood, boys and teenagers are usually given more emotional leeway on screen. And because of the hyper-masculinity stereotypes about black and brown men, the allowable window for vulnerability can be even smaller than it is for the whites. Gay men in media, meanwhile, tend to be more represented as being more emotionally expressive than their straight counterparts. Even though we all understand men and boys do cry, there's still an unwritten rule that men are not allowed to openly and sincerely cry in a small handful of social situations. Think of it like an emotional window where men can display a measure of vulnerability without jeopardizing their manhood status. The more extreme the situation, the more unrestrained the cry can be. So for instance, if a male character begins to sob in a dramatic role, audience have learned this means whatever is going on, it must be really, really unthinkably bad. Like never going to see the family again bad. Or I just killed a whole bunch of people bad. Or did cannibalism bad.
You've been so hard on yourself. I love that you have such high standards. But those aren't high standards, that's called perfection. And most people overestimate what they can do in a year, and they underestimate what they can do in 2 or 3 decades. And you haven't been around long enough to have those extra 2 or 3 decades. So don't fuck it up. There's time.
Now, the most common set of circumstances where the crying window opens involve death. Usually the death of a loved one, especially if they have been victimized in some way. This can include tears relating to an impending death or a breakdown immediately following a near-death experience. War in particular is often represented as a setting that provides access to these extreme situations, when it's socially permissible to open vulnerable with others, but at a tragic cost. It's also sometimes permissible for men to shed tears relating to personal failures, though it has to be a great failure like the failure to provide or protect. Occasionally that can include the failure of marriage, but more than often it's the failure to stop a catastrophe. The crying window also opens briefly in another social arena. There's crying in baseball, basketball, football, and other men's sports. But notice it's only around particular heightened moments of competition like the final game of the season or qualifying for a championship game. These intense situations may be the only time of the year where a grown man gets to cry in public and not be ridiculed for it. Tears of joy are probably the rarest acceptable type for men in media. These are restricted in past traumatic reunions, recognition for a life's work, the birth of a child, or even the father at his daughter's wedding.
Sit around, be depressed for a minute, cry about it, do whatever you have to, but don't stay there too long. Get up and go on with your life.
There are other few fridge cases where crying windows open, but notice that all these situations are rare, so rare that they may only come around a few times in a man's entire life. On average, we do see men crying slightly more often in dramas and romance stories, but in order for a man to cry in action-driven media, an almost supernatural level or trauma is usually required. Even when it's a tragic or a miraculous event, the flow of tears can still be noticeably constrained for male characters. Now, we're all familiar with the single tear cliche. One solitary drop of emotion is allowed to fall down a man's cheek to let the audience know that he harbors deep inner feelings. Feelings that will likely remain unspoken. Sometimes we don't even get the single tear. We just get to see damp, wet eyes and tears that are not allowed to escape. On many occasions while making this video, I found myself having to pause and hold in the tears that were trying to escape. I asked myself why. Why can't I cry Will I be ashamed of myself for allowing a tear to fall? You see, the reason why I'm spending so much time talking about men's vulnerability is because tears are healthy, both mentally and emotionally.
It's like the Pink Floyd line, living life of quiet desperation. I mean, that just terrifies
Well, that's Thoreau's quote, that most men live lives of quiet desperation. It's one of my favorite quotes ever because it's true. And I've been that guy.
Oh my God.
You're just in this world where you just can't wait to just run away.
And how do people get stuck there? How do you think they get stuck there?
Bills.
Bills, like financial bills?
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
That's
Bills and
interesting.
commitment. You have an apartment you have to pay for. You have a car you leased. You have a wife that you have to feed. You have a child you have to raise. You have to. You have your mortgage. You have your this. You have your that, and that's where it all comes from.
Where do you think opportunity plays into that?
Well, the opportunity takes place usually when you're young and you don't have any responsibility. That's when you have your options. Well, your options are severely limited the more you gather responsibilities.
On a biological level, crying releases stress and helps reduce anxiety. On a social level, the ability to cry and be openly vulnerable in front of others is critical for human connection and relationship building. It's difficult to build and maintain emotional supportive friendships without it. With that in mind, it's instructive to consider the wide array of social situations that fall outside of the permissible crying window. Men may fear losing masculinity points if they are seen crying due to things like pain, fear, heartbreak, pressure at work, experiencing depression or anxiety, or even embarrassment or hurt feelings. Crying is also frowned upon for men when doing things like watching a soppy movie, witnessing a beautiful sunset, or even connecting on an intimate level. Notice that all of these life events are relatively common. They're the kind of things that happen likely to men in their everyday lives. If we do see a man crying for once in these everyday reasons in a dramatic media, it feels so remarkable that we have to sit up and take notice. Look at all these social constructs that are rules that are governing the crying window. They can be bent from time to time, but if the rules are broken, the gentleman crying runs the risk of becoming the objective of ridicule amongst his peers, or even worse, being turned into a meme on the internet.
Don't need to be criticized about it, because it's not their fault. But if you are made fun of, just don't let it bother you. Just stay strong.
Often, we have this societal pressure of being a man, so I need to toughen up, I need to show and command respect, and then willy-nilly, someone will decide, well, in this situation, you should have been softer, calmer, and better. And then the pendulum goes the other way, and then you've told, well, now you're too soft.
Men cry, all right? I cry. Like I see a movie that inspires me or I get motivated about, I cry. Now I'm not gonna go bumbling around like an idiot because I got work to do. And sometimes crying isn't the appropriate response. And sometimes it is. Sometimes being vulnerable is not the appropriate response. You think about the word vulnerability, weakness. There's a time when a leader can't express vulnerability. He has to be strong, he has to be resolute, because that's what the team requires of him.
When men are depicted getting emotional outside of their permissible window, their tears are routinely played for comedy. Comedy that makes fun of men for crying consistently frames outbursts of emotion, vulnerability as pathetic, weak, and decisively unmanly. The occasion of tears with femininity is explicitly illustrated in the countless jokes deriding men for crying like a little girl. That insult is used to police men's expression of emotion while also reinforcing the sexist ideal that women are somehow overly emotional or lack self-control. Even though crying is a basic human response for everyone, regardless of their gender, it has come to be thought of as a gender phenomenon. This is why social pressure for men to put on a brave face and not cry in the presence of others is enormous. If men do get emotional in media, notice when and where they do it. Most of the time, vulnerable moments are only happen in private. It is a classic bit of cinematic sleight of hand, because we as the audience get to see the protagonist experience moments of true vulnerability, but they rarely show those feelings with other characters. Now, perhaps we wouldn't be as moved by the small cracks of emotion if we get to see free flow of tears more often. Movies and TV shows much more than simple entertainment. They also present us with what Bell Hooks calls the art of the possible. And that is why it's critical for media to show us more than just rare, momentarily glimpses of men's vulnerability. We need to see men crying unapologetically, men connecting emotionally with women and each other, and ultimately, to see men healing as they embrace the full range of their humanity. We need the crying window always open. If this video helped you in any way, then I am glad, because you are on your way to changing this world. Leonard, I love you, I miss you, and this one's for you, bro.